mass casualty incidents. So what I want to talk about for mass casualty incidents is the START triage, which maybe you guys are familiar with RPM, which stood for respirations, pulse, and mentation. That's essentially what the START triage system is. We look at those three features as a way to quickly triage patients and look at their level of survivability and the level of their distress in order to prioritize which patients need to be transported or treated first. So what constitutes a mass casualty event? Anything that has more patients than the current providers can deal with. Usually it means that we establish some sort of scene command and a medical branch. Things like traffic accidents involving, 2 or 3 cars, you can have 4 or 5 patients, 5 or 6 patients pretty easily. I haven't run on very many mass casualties. I mean, I've run on a bunch, but most of them are like 3 or 4 patients and they're just barely mass casualties. The biggest one I ran on was people running from a border patrol officer. There's like 16 people packed in a truck and the truck rolled, 9 fatalities on scene. There was, I think, like 7 or 8 transports, and then there was just people missing. People just like, they were injured and they just ran. So people were still popping up 2 days later. So that was a huge, huge mess, as you can imagine. This is a picture of the Boston Marathon bombing. Now, again, you approach a scene like this, you can already see some people are springing into action. Some people have a gene. I don't know if it's a gene or a likelihood or a personality trait or what. Most of you guys have it. In fact, I would reckon that every single one of you has it. I know I have it, which is when something happens, we don't run away from the situation, we run towards it. Maybe it's just out of a sense of morbid curiosity, but partially it's also out of a sense of what's going on, what needs to be done, how can I help, right? We want to help. I call it the hero gene, not to, flatter ourselves, but not everybody does that. In fact, in most situations, we're getting the hell out of there. Now, do I have this hero gene if I'm not working? Yes, but it's definitely tempered. If I was in a crowded mall and I heard gunshots, I would get me and my family and my friends out of that mall first and foremost. Okay, I would not be running to try to stop the shooter or help the people that have been shot. My first priority, and yours too, should be to get yourself out of that situation. And here's why. It's great if you can rush in and help people, but if you rush in too soon and you end up getting hurt yourself, you have now added a new patient and you've taken away a care provider. You've hurt the situation big time, all right? It's the same thing. If you're playing a football game and you're already down in the count, and you're trying to make a last-second drive to get a touchdown to tie the game up, and all of a sudden you throw an interception and they run it back for a touchdown, you're doubly far behind. This is the same thing that can happen if we rush in too soon. And also, and I know Phil will tell you guys that this is true, it's very likely that there's a secondary device. This is a big thing that people do when overseas in international terrorism, is they'll set off a bomb, like a roadside bomb or something. It's called a star trap. What does that stand for? But my understanding is they'll set off an initial thing, and they're trying to draw in the first responders, and they're trying to draw in more people, the looky-loos, the rubberneckers, a search and rescue trap. And then once all those people are in the area and it's more packed, then they set off the secondary device. And this is what causes extra chaos, because now your first responders are compromised. This is going to make the situation 3 or 4 times as chaotic as it already was. So this is something that we see very frequently overseas. So it could very well happen here too. We don't see as many cases of international terrorism here in the United States. Most of the terrorism we face is domestic terrorism. And it's not always religiously motivated. It's societally and realistically, it's behaviorally motivated, right? It's people suffering from schizophrenia and these delusions of grandeur. So let me get to these slides so I can show you how you can approach mass casualty incidents, because it makes a lot of sense when you see how it works out best. Let me get through these. Trains, earthquakes, people getting hurt. How do we deal with it? Good plan going into things. If we have contingency plans beforehand, we're better prepared. And that's the name of the game in EMS. Have a backup plan. Okay. When I'm showing up on scene, I have my plan and I have my backup plan. And if it's a severe case, I maybe even have a C plan just in case, right? And by the way, you should always have your final plan, your omega plan, which is get the hell out of there. Get the hell out. That's your final plan. Vegas would have been a great situation for an EMS trap. I don't like the way you're thinking, Phil, but you're absolutely right. But yeah, I mean, we're talking, how many people died in there? 49 or 50 or something like that. I think that was maybe tied for the deadliest one with that Pulse nightclub shooting. I think both of those were had 40 to 50 people that were killed. I don't know how many people were. More people obviously were involved. Yeah, that was a country music concert. By the way, I love country music, but someone the other day called it farm emo music, and I have not been able to stop thinking about that. Farm emo country music. Not to take it away, not to take anything away from country music. I love country music. I play a lot of country music myself. I'm a guitar player. Love it, but it's farm emo. Anyways, so we have a good plan going in. We're able to manage the scene and then post-disaster follow-up. Oh, why would it not be politically correct? You guys remember emo music, right? Did you all were you all in high school in the early 2000s? And maybe you didn't. Well, if you didn't know it, that's okay. It was a big thing when I was in high school. It was those guys that had the weird black haircuts that covered half their face, and they wore all black clothes, and they listened to My Chemical Romance, and they just were it's just life is so hard. And a lot of them ended up being cutters later. We make fun of them, but realistically, it's just people going through teenage angst stages. You know what? If you don't find it politically correct, don't say it. I don't want to hurt your sensible feelings, Phil. I know you're a sensitive guy. I'm not that weird. You guys have had literally 3 days to hear me just kind of mumbling to myself about all the weird things I think about on a daily basis. Listening to my interactive podcast here. All right, so this is a breakdown of kind of what it looks like. You have an incident commander up and above. Normally one person. In bigger events, think of wildfires that you got hundreds of people on. You might have all these things. Most of us are going to fall under operations. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to skip over here, and I'm going to get to the start triage. Oh, by the way, I'd like to talk about one thing that's very interesting, which is the study of humanity is called anthropology. And here's something kind of interesting that they discovered in anthropology that they applied to the militaries. When they were studying civilizations, independent all over the world, small tribes, communities, family units, civilizations, we found these same numbers cropping up over and over and over again. The first number is a group of about 3 to 5, 4 being the average of that. So let's say 4 people. This is essentially equal to the family unit. This is the group of people that you think about the most, are the closest to, and realistically see every single day. Okay, your wife, your kids. When you're younger, it's your siblings and your parents. All right, and then it becomes our wife and our kids, or your husband and your kids, whatever. That's the family unit. It's a group of 4 people. Then we have a slightly bigger grouping of about 40 people, and this is called your neighborhood group. All right, think about your close personal friends, your family members that live in town, your people like that you're close to. Most humans can form close relationships with about 40 people before we get diminishing returns. Beyond that, it's very difficult to maintain these friendships and remember all their names and their pets and all those things that matter to them. But we still like bigger groups. So there's one other bigger group than that, which is about 250 people. And this is kind of like a small community. So you've got your localized family unit, your extended friend network, and then you've got your community of about 250 people. So we kept seeing these numbers crop up time and time and time again in anthropology. So what do those numbers mean? Again, let's talk about the United States military. And Phil will know what I'm talking about here. The United States military looked at those numbers, and then we started breaking up our troop distinctions based on those numbers, with the idea behind that being we would bond more closely to these smaller groupings. You guys maybe are familiar with the concept of a squad or a firing squad. It's led by a sergeant, and there's usually 4, maybe 5 people in it. That's the family unit. These are the guys, if you're a military guy, that you're the closest with. It might be different in the Air Force, but I think in general, we follow these same groupings. It's your squad. Then you've got a platoon, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is about 40 people. Maybe it changes a little bit. That's your extended community unit. Again, guys you're really close with, guys you see frequently. In war zones, it's every single day, but it's people you see frequently. And then you've got your bigger distinctions. I'm not sure if it's like a company or whatever, but it would be about 250. So the United States military took these numbers in Anthropology and broke them up. What does this have to do with us? It has to do with how we can command others underneath us. So it's much easier to have a span of control over 3 to 5 people. When you start adding more people, it gets more difficult because we're programmed biologically to be able to relate very closely to 3 or 4 people. Think about a fire station, 4 guys, maybe 3 to 5 guys, right? Maybe 6, maybe if you've got multiple engine companies, you got like 10 people at a station, big cities, but most stations have 4 guys living at or working at them. And it's the same 4 guys. It's your family unit. Kind of interesting. So let me get to the one so I can show you the triage algorithm, because that's what's going to make this the easiest to understand. Boom, boom, boom. Once I get there, it's going to make sense. Okay. Now, this might be really small for you guys, depending on what screen you're looking at it on, but I'm going to read it off to you guys and we can walk through it. So let's say you are a responder and you're showing up to, like, remember that picture of the Boston Marathon bombing, something on that scale. There's people all around. You don't really know how many people are injured, and you're the first one on scene. How do you deal with this? Well, the first thing is we need to make sure that the scene is safe, obviously. Once we've determined that, the first and most important priority is determining the rough number of patients. Okay, and we need to get on the horn with dispatch and let them know what's going on so that they can start dispatching more units. So in order to do this, we have to assess the scene, and we can already get on the radio and say, hey, it looks like we've got maybe a stage collapse, a bombing has gone off, maybe a shooting, something like that. Shooter's been apprehended. It appears that we have maybe 10 to 20 patients. We'll assess and we'll advise. Okay. Then you need to start approaching the patient. So the very first step is to identify the walking wounded. And how we do that is we say, hey, if you can hear me, I need you to come and stand over in this area. Everybody that can follow directions and ambulate is considered a green. So we break up our mass casualty patients in 4 categories. They're green, yellow, red, and black. Black means they are beyond all hope or they're already deceased. Red is immediate care needed. Yellow is delayed, but still significant injuries. And green is minor. Now, you could have serious injuries and still be a minor patient, right? If my hand is amputated, I could still maybe follow directions and ambulate, and I would still be classified as a green originally. So after we're done with all the rest of the patients, we're going to go back and assess the greens. But for now, everyone that can walk and follow commands is a green patient. Everybody that's left are your actual patients. So remember, RPM, respirations, then we look at perfusion, then we look at mental status. For respirations, we look and see if they're breathing. If they're not breathing, we can reposition their airway 1 time. If they are still not breathing, we mark them as black and we move on. Okay? Very rapidly do this. It should honestly take you about 10 seconds to assess each patient at the maximum. If we reposition their airway and they start regaining some agonal respirations, they should be marked as a red, immediate. I know this is yellow, but this should be red, immediate. Now, let's say we walk up and they are breathing. Okay, we can see them breathing. We look at how well they're breathing. If they're breathing really fast, they're in shock and they're immediate. If they're breathing under 30 times a minute, that means relatively their respiratory is not super compromised yet. We have some time. Now we check their perfusion. We can either check capillary refill or try to feel for a radial pulse. At this time, we'll also be assessing for any major bleeding. If there is major bleeding, we'll apply a tourniquet or something to control that bleeding. and then we mark them red and we move on. Okay, so it helps if you're doing triage assessment to have a couple tourniquets, and you maybe just slap a tourniquet on and then move on to the next patient. They're red next. Then if their capillary refill is good, their respirations are good, their capillary refill is good, we look at their mentation. And this one's straight, cut and dry. Do they understand what's going on? They seem woozy, they're red. Are they able to follow directions? They're a yellow, they're delayed. All right. This might seem kind of quick and rough, and it is, but that's the way it has to be. This is honestly, I believe, the most efficient way to very quickly and rapidly triage people. This is going to be difficult. If you've never dealt with extreme cases of trauma and in huge numbers of people, this can be very overwhelming very quickly. I'm not going to lie, I get overwhelmed by this too. Most people are going to get overwhelmed in the case of a mass casualty incident. Even someone who has extensive trauma or medical training can get overwhelmed when there's too many patients for us to care for effectively. It's going to be tough. You just got to do the best you can. All right. So after everything is all done, we come up with an after action report. We're going to talk a little bit about helicopters, but that's not important. Come up with an after action report that everybody can read. We'll do a critical incident stress debriefing to see how things went without necessarily pointing the finger or assigning blame. And then we will come up with a plan for next time, because there's always going to be another MCI coming down the pike. All right. The chance that we're going to respond to some sort of domestic terrorism is less of a if and more of a when these days.